Hey there. Remember when I said I wasn't going to plant that many containers in the garden this year? Well, I just went into the garden shed and grabbed a few more pots because I want to start a couple more containers. At least maybe, well, I got 3 out right now. But one of the things I'm going to talk about today is growing a container fully from seed, and I wanted to share with you how I'm going to be planting up these containers. I'm going to be 100% just direct sowing these containers right from the start from seed, but there are a few things that you need to consider when you want to do that and when you're trying to pair up which plants you want to grow together. And so I thought I would just go ahead sit down and chat really quick with you all about how to do that, because over my years of container gardening, there have been a few things I've learned. All right, so of course the first piece of the puzzle when starting any kind of container is to get a good quality potting mix, best quality that you can, and pick the right size for container, which varies a little bit depending on what plant you want to grow, but then also just what size you have available for your garden. I'm using these, I think this is about a 10-inch wide container. I've got 3 of them, and I'm going to plant them up with a few different seeds. So as I said, this is about direct sowing into your containers. Obviously, you can start lots of plants from seed indoors or buy started plants and put them into container. And some of these rules apply for that, but I want to focus today on starting just direct sowing. So one of the things you need to worry about when you're direct sowing is the size of the plant and the seedling. You always want to consider what size plants you're growing together, because that's going to make a big difference when you're trying to get them to interplay next to each other. If you pick a dwarf basil and a squash and you try to grow them next to each other, even from starts, you're going to have a hard time, because one is just going to be growing so much bigger and so much faster, and their growth habits are going to be so different that the squash is basically going to just take over the entire container. And you've probably had this happen if you've ever, put super tuners or something into a container and it's just taken over the container. That's always an element. And one thing when I'm thinking about starting containers, direct sowing them from seed, is I'm thinking about the size of the mature plant, but also the size of the seedling. So something like a bean or a nasturtium, that comes up and pretty quick turns into a really nice large seedling. Something like a tomato comes up, but it's going to take much longer to reach maturity. It's going to be a small seedling for a bit longer, so you can't really plant them right next to each other. I picked out a few things that I'm going to plant today that I feel grow at semi-similar rates, or where I have a little bit of room. So the first thing I'm going to plant are a couple beans. So beans in general are not a super a great plant for a container if you want a big harvest. If you want to be eating a big side of some kind of green beans, you really need to plant a lot of them in order to get that harvest. But if you just want to have a few for fun, or if you want to fill a container quickly, beans are a good one. They have a 54 days to maturity. That's how we know when they're going to be full grown and be producing beans. When I'm pairing something with a plant like this, I want to look for something that also has a similar window to maturity, that hopefully will have seedlings that are roughly the same size and the same kind of robustness, and they'll just kind of grow together and create a nice habit. If I were to plant these beans next to this dill that I have here, this says it takes 20 to 25 days to mature. To emerge. So this is going to mature in 50 days. This is going to be barely even emerging out of the ground in 25 days. These two, not a good combination. It's going to be halfway to maturity and it's going to be just barely coming up. Instead, I want to pair something like a bean that grows really quickly, grows to maturity fast, and has a decently big seedling with something that also has a robust seedling like a zinnia. So this is, let's see, it doesn't say how many days to maturity, but usually zinnias are somewhere around 40-ish, 50 days to maturity as well. They should grow really nicely side by side. The beans are a little bit bigger seedling size, but the zinnias tend to grow up nice and quick. This is a Gold Rush. So it's kind of a pretty decorative green bean, which will be really nice. And then I have a Lilliput mixed zinnia, which is gonna be a pretty colorful, small-headed zinnia. I think they'll be fun together. I also know that this is going to be kind of reaching its maturity. It'll be done in about 60 days. And the zinnias too, I find for me, they hit their maturity, they bloom a few times, and then the plants usually start to succumb to powdery mildew, or they get a little leggy, or if they get big enough, they'll just kind of take over the whole container, keep growing and keep spreading out. And then I can just pull out the beans and let the zinnias go, depending on how healthy they are. That's the other thing with looking at those days to maturity, because you kind of want to know how long you've got the container going. Is one thing going to be done and then the other plant's still growing, and then you're going to have half an empty container? I'm going to kind of get around that by putting the beans all the way around the outside, and I'm going to grow the zinnias in the middle. So the zinnias will be in the middle, and they can either continue to grow, take off, and just expand as zinnias do over the season, or if they're getting powdery mildewy, then we'll take them out and we'll reuse the container, repurpose something else. Another combination I'm going to do, again, thinking similar growth habits, are a cosmos. This is a carpet mix cosmos. It's a super pretty, like kind of orangey, bright cosmos, and this really beautiful licorice basil, which is a delicious smelling, nice tall basil. It also produces some pretty flower heads on top of it. They're both going to grow similar kind of similar growth habits, big, tall, bushy, expansive. The days to maturity on the basil is 70 to 80. And again, it doesn't say over here on the cosmos, but I know from personal experience that it's about a similar time frame, and I think that they'll grow well together. So you just want to think about those combinations. If it was earlier in the spring and I wanted to do something like nasturtiums, again, I could put those in with maybe like a squash. Those would be bigger, nice, bigger size with green beans. That would be a good match. So just look at the height, the growth pattern of your plant, and then also look at the days to maturity, and you can kind of get a sense of whether or not you should grow them. Now, of course, if you are starting with seedlings, you can always have a tomato seedling and throw in some nasturtium seeds beside it, or put in some basil seeds beside it, where you know that you can grow the seeds alongside the seedling and it'll work out. But if you are just starting, direct sowing from seed, days to maturity, size of seedling, very important. Of course, also the size of the container. We don't want to pack them in too tightly. If you grow plants direct sown in a container, how close they are together is going to impact the overall size of your plant. If, for example, I were to put a sunflower in this container, I could grow it. It might even bloom, but it probably would be shorter than like its designed height. Usually, I like to grow corn every year in containers, and it never reaches like that maturity size, the full size. It'll always be a little stunted. So will these Lilliput zinnias be a little stunted? I think I have a big enough space that they won't. What I'm gonna do is probably put in about maybe 6 or 7 bean plants. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, actually, you know what? I think it's gonna be 8. We'll do 4 on each side of the beans. And then we'll put like 2 or 3 zinnias in the middle, maybe just 2. I don't want to overpack this container. I'm gonna put 3 for good luck. But I don't wanna overseed this container because I don't want to cause the beans not to be able to thrive. Beans really do well in containers. I actually have not had super big issues with them being stunted by the size requirements, but I know the zinnias definitely will. I have had zinnias that are very much stunted in size because I have planted them in a container, and so I just want to avoid that by only putting the 3 in the center and then the beans all around. I hope this makes sense as far as matching these plants together. Using their location in the container, as I said before, also is kind of important, just depending on where you're going to be looking at the container from, but then also like giving the beans the space around the outside. They will grow up and they will kind of spill over the sides of the container, and the zinnias will grow from the center. So you want to think about that too as far as growth habit. You know, if it's a nasturtium, it's going to spill off the container, put that toward the edge, and then if it's something more tall and upright, like your basil or whatever, put that in the middle or toward the back. Okay, let's do the basil and cosmos. With this container, because they're similar heights and sizes, I'm just gonna put like 4 or 5 seeds of each, one on each side of the container, and then I'll let them just grow to each side because they will be both tall, kind of columnar style plants, and they're just gonna like bush out to each side, and I'm just gonna let them do that. So very important to think about how that plant's gonna be looking and its growth habit once it reaches maturity, so you don't have, say, you know, the zinnias around the outside and then like the beans or something trying to like grow through the zinnias. It might look cool, but it also might not work. I mean, if you want to give it a try, I always say go for it, but typically let the spilly things be to the front or around the sides. It just ends up working out a little better. I'm gonna put this right here for now. I'm gonna have to do some more rearranging in the container garden, but I think for now that'll work. Of course, the next step is going to be watering all of these plants in really well and making sure that they stayed watered. Yes, say well watered. Yes, I only did 2 containers. I started second guessing what I wanted to do in this third one, so I'm just gonna put it to the side, and I think we'll plant that up later. I'm just gonna leave it for right now. I think those 2 containers are gonna be really fun to watch grow, and we'll stick with that. I did want to show you, just for a little context, what like a cosmos growing in a container can look like. This is this beautiful double Dutch rose cosmos, and I think I have 3 plants in here, which is like, as you can see, the perfect amount for this size container. And then I actually popped in a few more zinnia seeds. 1, I think 2, there might be, oh yeah, 3. So there's gonna be 3 zinnia plants. I did the Oklahoma mix zinnias in here. Now, that was not my original plan. I was hoping to have some sweet potatoes come up in this side, but they didn't end up sprouting. So typically I would not plant them this like late. I would have had the zinnias in at the same time pretty much as the cosmos, but in order to just kind of save the look of the container, I just direct sowed them in here, and these were direct sown, oh gosh, you know, 8 weeks ago at least. So you can always come back in and re-sow and try things out. This Double Dutch Cosmos is a really good container variety. As you can see, it's nice and compact, which is really good for container. As you're growing things, it's always good to take note when you find something that's like, oh, this stays really like cute and compact, and it actually works really well for the container. I mean, isn't that gorgeous? So those are my thoughts as far as direct sowing containers. I love to do it. I love to container garden, and you don't always want to have to buy starter plants or start plants inside. So if you are late to getting your container garden going, or you don't want to go get starts, don't worry. Just come on out and direct sow some things, and always experiment. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's okay too. Do not feel bad if you try to plant up a container and you have one thing take off or one thing not do well or whatever. I've had many containers that have failed over the years, and that's kind of just part of the process. But if you follow those little tips I gave you, it should get you in the right direction as far as building out your container garden from seed. So with that, I am going to head inside because it is getting hot out here. Just we'll water these containers in first. But thank you as always so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.